Welcome to the Alcohol Minimalist podcast. I'm your host, Molly Watts. If you want to change your drinking habits and create a peaceful relationship with alcohol, you're in the right place. This podcast explores the strategies I use to overcome a lifetime of family alcohol abuse, more than 30 years of anxiety and worry about my own drinking, and what felt like an unbreakable daily drinking habit. Becoming an alcohol minimalist means removing excess alcohol from your life so it doesn't remove you from life. It means being able to take alcohol or leave it without feeling deprived. It means to live peacefully, being able to enjoy a glass of wine without feeling guilty and without needing to finish the bottle. With science on our side, we'll shatter your past patterns and eliminate your excuses. Changing your relationship with alcohol is possible. I'm here to help you do it. Let's start now. Well, hello and welcome back to the Alcohol Minimalist podcast with me, your host, Molly Watts, coming to you from, it is a fallish Oregon right now. Yeah, we have been transitioning and it's been cloudy, a little cooler. There's been some raindrops. Definitely this week I got to put on boots for the first time. I went into the fall wardrobe area of my closet. I have not got a sweater out yet. It's not been that cool, but definitely fall is in the air here in Oregon. It is fall-ish. How are you doing? It's mid-September. Welcome to the second of my Monday Drop episodes. I'm loving this rhythm. I hope you are too. And here at Alcohol Minimalist, we are getting ready for a more sober October. More sober October means that we will be prioritizing alcohol-free days, adding in more alcohol-free days than we typically do, but we're not trying to go for necessarily a full 31 days of being alcohol-free. I often talk about meeting yourself where you are at and then taking a small step. I'm actually going to be talking about on Thursday on the Think Thursday shorter episode that I just started doing last week. Super fun. I'm going to be talking about iterative learning and what that means with regards to behavior change. So stay tuned for that because that's really about small steps. And in small steps for a more sober October, something you might decide is that if you're not having any alcohol-free days right now, you would just add one per week, right? Try to go one per week for the month of October. That would be a more sober October. If you are consistently having alcohol-free days each week, but you haven't put a full week together, maybe that's your attempt to just take it one step further and make a small step towards continuous improvement. And just it's an attempt, it's a try. You're going to do something a little bit different, a little bit more sober in More Sober October. I've got more details coming up in the next couple of weeks about some opportunities around More Sober October, but I'm not quite ready to talk about that yet. Stay tuned. And so, yeah, let's get going with this week's episode. I am talking this week about binge drinking again. And I'm talking about it this week because it's been coming up in conversations that I've been having both with my coaching clients and people who've just reached out to me via email asking questions. I see it in the groups. We have a binge drinking chat in our Facebook group. In Mindful Drinking, people talk about binging. And really what I hear often, and notably, I would have not considered myself a binge drinker, first of all, right? I was a daily habit drinker. And so I think that like many of you, I associated binge drinking with going, fully overboard, drinking to the point where you are throwing up, drinking to the point where you are blacking out, getting really sloppy drunk, right? Like that's what I thought of when I envision binge drinking, and really drinking a lot, drinking fast, getting really intoxicated, maybe in a quicker way. Also, typically, I think I always envision it in kind of a social setting a lot of times. Not necessarily, but that's what my mind often creates when I create a vision of binge drinking, right? Well, here's the thing. That picture, that definition of binge, yes. Is it very true that if you are binge drinking or if you raise your blood alcohol content above a certain point, are you more likely to throw up, pass out, all of those things? Absolutely, without question. However, I don't think many of us who I didn't, like I said, I wouldn't have told you I was a binge drinker, but by definition, I often was binge drinking. And the thing of it is I want to really address from both a science perspective and a mindset perspective, because this kind of goes along with the mindset of once I start, I just can't stop. And I know many of you think that way around alcohol specifically, and really around alcohol as opposed to other things that you might binge, right? But I just want to do another episode on binge drinking, really get into how it affects our brains, the science of it, how to avoid it. I'm going to give some tactical science-based ideas as well as some mindset things that I want you to think about to set yourself up for success so that you are not put into situations where you might potentially where you can avoid it, right? Because this is definitively one of the things that people want to stop doing when I talk with them about creating an alcohol minimalist life. And by definition, what I defined as being an alcohol minimalist means that we are not having binge episodes by definition. So, again, let's start with a clear definition. According to the NIAAA, which is the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, binge drinking is both a pattern of drinking that brings a person's blood alcohol concentration, your BAC, to a level of 0.08% or above. And it usually occurs after consuming 4 or more drinks for women and 5 or more drinks for men, and typically within about 2 hours. Now, again, the time frame is a little bit more nuanced here, and really typically in other places they say in a setting, which is not very specific, right? But if you've typically viewed binge drinking as that kind of all-out party binge where people pass out and get sick, I just want you to see that in reality it can be much more subtle. For myself, I, again, did not consider myself a binge drinker. I was a daily habit drinker, but I do like IPAs. And as I've shared before, those IPAs have a higher alcohol by volume. So don't get confused. There's BAC, blood alcohol concentration, and ABV, alcohol by volume. Alcohol by volume is what you look at when you are looking at how much alcohol is in the drink of choice. And my IPAs have a higher ABV than just a regular beer. So when I thought I was just having 3 beers, right, I was actually technically having the equivalent of 4 to potentially 5 standard drinks, which would then classify as a binge for me, even though I wouldn't have told you that it was. And I didn't necessarily do it in a 2-hour time frame. I don't know. It probably would. I'd have to have done a little more research on my blood alcohol content to see how high my BAC was going. But again, I want you to think about that in terms of your own self, what you do choose to drink, and how it might be technically considered to a binge. And why is that important? It's important because the higher our blood alcohol concentration, our BAC goes, the more likely we are to experience these negative consequences. So if we can avoid having our BAC go up too high, that is where we get to, to avoid having some of those consequences. And again, it's not only important from a health perspective, but a mental health perspective. And quite honestly, if you're trying to build an alcohol minimalist lifestyle, then binging just really isn't going to be a part of it. And over drinking really isn't going to be a part of it, because when we get to that level of blood alcohol concentration, we are no longer able to make the decisions that align with our long-term goals. And that's really at the crux of why we want to avoid it. So if you have ever had the experience of drinking more than you intended, and wondering why it happened, we're going to break down some of that science here in this episode about how alcohol is affecting your brain. And we're also going to talk about ways to stay mindful and stay in control. All right. It's important to note that binge drinking isn't just about drinking a large number of drinks over time. It's about how quickly you drink them and how rapidly your blood alcohol content rises. The faster you drink, the higher your blood alcohol concentration spikes. And that's, again, what is really problematic, especially if you're going to try to stay mindful and, and not have an overdrinking experience. So if you really look at it two ways, like it's not just the amount of alcohol over time, but raising your blood alcohol concentration is the key that I want us to try to avoid in the first place. Blood alcohol content, your blood alcohol concentration, your blood alcohol content is the measure of alcohol in your bloodstream. The higher your BAC, the more alcohol is impacting your brain and your body. Now, we know that 0.08% is what the NIAAA defines as a binge episode. It's also the legal limit for driving in most states. But what does the number really mean in terms of how alcohol is affecting you step by step? We've talked about this before, but around 0.02% to 0.05%, that is kind of the sweet spot, right? That's where you're going to feel more relaxed, more social, a little more confident. The therapeutic effects of alcohol stop at 0 to 0.055%. And that's when things start to shift. That is when we are going to start impacting the part of your brain that is responsible for making those goal-oriented, future-oriented, logical decisions, the prefrontal cortex, because that's after 0.055%, that's when the prefrontal cortex starts to really be impacted. And that's where your brain manages impulse control, and that's where it makes more rational choices. When alcohol impairs your prefrontal cortex, your ability to weigh the consequences of your actions is going to be compromised. And that's why when our blood alcohol content goes up over that 0.055% and towards that 0.08%, it is going to become a lot more difficult to manage your mind, right? And that's why after you have a few drinks, it becomes definitively easier to rationalize just having another one or engaging in behaviors that you wouldn't normally consider, like driving after drinking, right? When your blood alcohol content goes too high, you start to not be able to manage your mind with the prefrontal cortex, which is what people tell me all the time. Like, that's how come they think it's a problem, right? That's why they think they can't manage this. I want you to understand something. Just because alcohol affects your prefrontal cortex, it does not mean that you lose all control. Even when your blood alcohol content rises above 0.055%, even when it hits 0.08%, you still have the ability to make mindful choices. Yes, it takes more effort. Yes, there is challenge in staying present. But if you check in with yourself, if you continue to try to ask yourself questions, you can stay mindful. Oftentimes, like I said, I hear people tell me once I start, I just can't stop. And we're going to talk about more of that in a minute. I want to talk first about why we tend to binge drink in the first place. All right. binge drinking doesn't just happen in a vacuum. There are many reasons that people end up drinking more than they planned, and it's not always because they intend to. Now, there are people that definitively go into a setting with the idea that they are going to binge and are, maybe they don't think I'm going to binge, but they definitely think I'm going to get drunk, right? Like the goal is I want to get drunk. That is a mindset, that is a decision, that is a a thing that you are going to have to change if you want to become an alcohol minimalist. There is no part of being an alcohol minimalist that allows you to decide that you want to go get drunk and no longer be able to think, which is really what is happening when you're getting that intoxicated. Hey there, it's Molly taking a quick break to talk with you about Sunnyside. You all know that Sunnyside is my app of choice and my recommendation for a tool to help you create sustainable change around your drinking. One of the things that I love about Sunnyside is their commitment to improving the user experience, and that has been a constant since I started working with them nearly 3 years ago now. Since June this year, they have added the Android version of their iOS app, so now it's available for Apple users and all Android users. It's the same Sunnyside experience across all of those devices, and it's just another example of their commitment to improving the user experience. Another example would be the fact that now you can set it up for push notifications. So you can take all of the daily texts, the reminders, and put them into a push preference so that you determine how you want to receive the support from Sunnyside. I would love for you to check it out. Go to www.sunnyside.co/Molly to get started with a 15-day free trial today. Alcohol obviously helps us feel more relaxed, less inhibited. That's why people drink, often drink in the first place. And it does impair our judgment. And that is, one of the things that has to be taken into account, and one of the things that we have to continue to pay attention to if we want to avoid binge drinking. Social pressures also play a huge role, like I said, in terms of binge drinking. You've probably been to a party or an event where you felt like everyone was drinking and you didn't want to be the odd person out. And it's easy to get swept up in the moment, especially when alcohol is so normalized in those events, right? And and I know people often use weddings as a great example. I know that the free bar syndrome can definitively lead people to binge drinking episodes at weddings and things like that. There can also be emotional reasons that trigger binges for people. Being stressed out, being anxious, being bored can be triggers for overdrinking. And when we have developed a habit of using alcohol as a coping mechanism, especially when, whether for the maybe people that aren't drinking daily, but you are drinking on the weekends, right? So you save up everything and you are building anxiety, building stress all throughout the week, and you look for that release on the weekends. It's a way to numb out having to deal with those negative feelings. And that is a trigger. When we think that way, when we lead ourselves that way, it is absolutely easier to end up binge drinking. How do we avoid falling into these binge drinking traps ahead of time, right? How do we think about this? Here are some practical tactics that I want to offer to you to stay in control and avoid that rapid rise in blood alcohol content that would help, or would mean that you would be experiencing a binge drinking episode. Number one, this is something that I talk about all the time, whether or not you have a binge drinking problem or you are simply a habit drinker trying to change the habit. You've got to make a plan ahead of time. It has to be a doable plan. Now, this is where it gets tricky, all right? I understand that sometimes in a doable drink plan, that if you have been standard drinking, 4 or 5 drinks at a time, that is by definition a binge for women. It is mostly, 5 to 6 would be a binge for most men. And if that has been your pattern and you hear me say, make a doable plan, you want to make a plan that you can stick to, then if your plan is already going to be putting you into a binge drinking scenario, it may be very challenging to stay on plan, if that makes sense, right? And at the same time, I want you to think about it ahead of time. I'm still not going to tell you that you absolutely have to make a plan for less than a binge drinking episode, right? So only 3 drinks for a woman, only 4 drinks for a man. And if you can't stick to it, then you're screwed. Like, no, I'm not going to tell you that. I do want you to go into it understanding that if you are putting those, the 4, 5, 6 drinks on a plan, you're going to have to involve some other tactics so that your blood alcohol content doesn't rise too quickly, so that you can avoid some of the negative consequences associated with a binge drinking episode. So again, put this boundary in place, decide ahead of time. Hopefully, you've heard me when I said, make it a doable plan, just like I always talk about. If it does include a number of drinks that is taking you into quote unquote binge territory, then we're going to utilize some of these other tactics to help us avoid those negative consequences. And again, where you are right now is not where you are going to end up. Our goal is to minimize alcohol. So if we are still including those bigger numbers, I'm assuming that's because we're meeting ourselves where we're at, but we're not going to stay there. We are going to look for continuous improvement. We are going to try to reduce, and especially on the nights where you're maybe having that many, we want to get down to those limits where it would not be considered binge as quickly as possible. All right, so number 1, make a plan ahead of time. Got to have a plan in place. It helps if it comes from your logical prefrontal cortex early and you have that structure and that boundary. Even when you start drinking and it becomes harder to manage, it's important to have the plan ahead of time to help avoid it in the first place. Number 2, you've got to eat some food. All right. Drinking on an empty stomach is a classic scenario that sets people up for not only that rise in blood alcohol content really quickly, and it means that when you eat on an empty stomach, the alcohol goes straight into your system and the BAC spikes really quickly. When you have food in your stomach, it slows down that process, gives your body more time to metabolize the alcohol. And if you have plenty of protein and plenty of fats in you before you start drinking, it's going to be better. It's going to help you avoid it. All right. Again, it's going to mean that if you do drink the higher number of drinks, you have a better chance of it not spiking your blood alcohol content and being a binge by that definition. Tactic number 3 is to alternate non-alcoholic and alcoholic drinks. This is a very simple but highly effective strategy. All right. After every alcoholic drink, have a glass of water or a non-alcoholic beverage in between. Not only does it help you stay hydrated, but it also slows down your alcohol consumption, giving your body more time to process the alcohol. It also helps you stay more mindful, and it will help avoid you getting caught up in the moment of just wanting to overdrink and keep going. Tactic number 4 is to choose lower alcohol by volume drinks. I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier when I was talking about the IPAs being a higher ABV, but this would be really specific to maybe choosing to drink something like wine or beer as opposed to a cocktail with hard liquor. Spirits raise your blood alcohol content faster because they have a higher alcohol by volume. And if you can choose drinks that are lower ABV, it will help you from, again, causing your blood alcohol content to spike too quickly. It also allows you to enjoy a drink more slowly without reaching that tipping point too fast. Tactic number 5, stay mindful by checking in with yourself. we talk a lot about mindful drinking here on Alcohol Minimalist, and I'm going to suggest that you even go as far if you have experienced binge drinking often, frequently, if this is a problem, a challenge for you consistently, then I would like to offer to you that you really, again, establish some tactics ahead of time, put these things, these ideas in place, and tell yourself, like, this is what I'm going to do to avoid that situation. Tactic number 5, like I said, staying mindful and checking in with yourself. Set a timer on your phone for every 30 minutes. Or, tell yourself after each drink, you're going to ask yourself, how am I feeling? Do I really want another drink? Am I just drinking out of, trying to fit in, or what is happening here? Is this next drink going to be worth it for me? Little check-ins like that can really help bring you back to the present moment and remind you to stay within your limits. Now, those are some tactical, kind of more sciencey, well, the checking in with yourself. It really is, because again, it's just pausing and getting you to slow down, and the speed at which you consume alcohol. That's another tactic. I should have put it in there, is drink slowly. Okay? Drink slowly. That's why the alternating between alcoholic beverage and non-alcoholic beverage, the speed at which we consume the alcohol matters as well. The thing that I want to talk about now is about your mindset, about your ability to not binge alcohol when you drink. All right. So this is for all of you that have ever said to me, when I start, I just can't stop. I'm fine. I can have all the alcohol-free days I want, but then whenever I do drink, I overdrink. I want to really ask you about the permission-giving thoughts that are coming up while you're drinking that you are not challenging. These kind of thoughts are the ones that kind of give you permission to keep going, even when you know you have had enough. We've all had these thoughts. Everyone is still drinking, so it's fine if I do. Sound familiar? I've already had 3 drinks. What's one more? These permission type giving thoughts fuel binge drinking, because they basically provide us excuses to ignore the plan that we had in place. The things that you're thinking, though, they aren't facts. They're just beliefs. They are ideas. They are thoughts. They are options, and they can be challenged. One way to counter, those permission-giving thoughts is to, right in the moment when you hear yourself say it, reframe it right away. So if you start to think, I've already started, so I'll just keep going. When you hear that thought, say, I can stop drinking at any time and I will feel much better if I do it. Use something empowering. I shared, back in the summer content series, my last share was with Elizabeth Benton, and she had the tactics for reframing. If you haven't listened to that episode, I really encourage it. It's a really good way to challenge thinking, is to reframe thoughts. And there's options for neutral reframing, positive reframing, and encouraging reframing. Anyways, go back and listen to that. I want you to recognize the thoughts for what they are in terms of giving you permission to drink off plan, and decide ahead of time that I'm going to challenge my brain when it starts throwing out those permission giving thoughts, and even when my blood alcohol content is rising. I'm going to still stay mindful, and I am going to pay attention. I hope that this episode, I hope that you heard some things here that helped you understand, number one, why you're binge drinking, how it happens from a physiological level, from raising that blood alcohol content, and how, if we raise our blood alcohol content too quickly, it makes it really hard to avoid binge drinking. So we want to take action to not go into and raise that blood alcohol content too quickly. For some of you ladies, especially, I want you to hear me. If you are somebody who manages your weight and you're a slender, small person, and you go into a situation thinking, I'm just going to have 2 drinks, but you have those 2 drinks quickly and you have them without eating, you could very well be raising your blood alcohol content up into that 0.08% range. Okay. And if you do that, it is going to make it very, very challenging to stick to your 2-drink plan that you had going in, right? It's very easy then to add to the third. And once you get to the 3rd drink, if you get those 3 drinks in you, it is really going to become more and more challenging to stick to an alcohol minimalist type plan. So I really want you to understand and pay attention to what you're eating, pacing yourself, how much alcohol, what alcohol you are drinking as it relates to making a plan to avoid binging. All right? That's really what this episode is all about. We want to avoid binge drinking episodes, not only because, like I said, they don't fit in with an alcohol minimalist lifestyle, but let's face it, they are the catalyst for all of the negative consequences, and it's just simply no fun to pass out. It is no fun to throw up. It is no fun to wake up with the kind of hangover that typically happens after a binge drinking episode. So this is, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous for all sorts of reasons. It's dangerous for behavior. It's dangerous for falling injuries. There's numerous reasons. Not to mention the fact that nobody feels good about themselves after a binge drinking episode. Typically, what I hear from people is that they just start to question their own ability to change their relationship with alcohol. It's not true. Do not listen to your brain. You have every capability of changing your relationship with alcohol, and you can absolutely avoid a binge. It isn't the alcohol that is causing you to overdrink it, okay? That is not the case. It is how you are setting yourself up. It is, yes, the alcohol can impact your ability to avoid a binge, but if you set yourself up properly, if you make a plan ahead of time, if you have these tactics in place, I guarantee you that you can learn to include alcohol in your life in a alcohol minimalist, in a mindful way without over drinking. And I want you to quit telling yourself that once you start, you just can't stop. It's not a fact. You absolutely can. You are absolutely capable. Your beautiful, brilliant human brain is how we're going to do it. And I hope that this episode provides you some value for that. Come back Thursday for an episode on iterative learning and what that means. I'll explain it then, but I'm really excited about Think Thursday, so I hope you're enjoying it as well. If you would like to learn more about how I work with people and what we do, go to www.mollywatts.com/workwithme. I would love to hear from you. How are you doing? Are you ready for a more sober October? Let's do it. I will see you next week. Hey, thanks for listening to the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. Take something you learned from this week's episode and put it into action. Changing your drinking habits and creating a peaceful relationship with alcohol is 100% possible. You can stop worrying, stop feeling guilty about overdrinking, and become someone who desires alcohol less. I work with people in 3 ways. You can learn about them over at www.mollywatts.com/workwithme. Or better yet, reach out to me directly. It's molly@mollywatts.com. We'll jump on a call and discuss what's best for you. This podcast is really just the beginning of our conversation. Let's keep it going.